The morning I found out, I was holding a thermos of coffee in a paper bag from the deli on Hadley Street. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the anger, not what she said when I confronted her 3 weeks later. Just that paper bag. A turkey club on sourdough, extra pickles, the way she'd liked it since before our boys were born. Warm against my palm as I stood on the sidewalk outside Meridian Financial Group and watched a man I didn't recognize walk out of the building, straighten his tie, and hand my wife a kiss on the cheek like he'd been doing it his entire life. She laughed at something he said, tilt her head the way she used to tilt it at me. I stood there long enough that the traffic light cycled twice. Then I turned around, walked back to my car, and sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and the coffee going cold. I'm 58 years old. I was married for 31 years. And I want to say right now, before I get into any of it, that I don't tell this story because I'm angry anymore. I tell it because when it happened to me, I looked everywhere for someone who understood what this particular kind of betrayal felt like, the slow, methodical kind. The kind that had clearly been running parallel to your life for so long that you start to wonder if your life was ever the real one at all. So, here it is. My wife's name is Renata. I'll use it because she knows exactly who she is, and because changing it would feel like one more small dishonesty on top of everything else, and I'm done with dishonesty. We met in Cincinnati in 1992 at a mutual friend's 4th of July cookout. She was wearing a yellow dress and arguing with someone about interest rates. I thought that was the most attractive thing I'd ever seen. I was a 30-year-old project manager at a mid-sized construction firm. She was 2 years into her career in finance. By the end of that summer, we were inseparable. And by the following spring, I had a ring in my jacket pocket. We built a good life. 2 boys, Caleb and Mason, now 27 and 24. A house in Westerville, Ohio, with a porch we refinished ourselves the summer of 2004. She moved up steadily through her firm, eventually landing a VP title and then, 8 years ago, a senior director position at Meridian. I was proud of her. Genuinely. I used to tell people about her career the way some men talk about their kids' Little League stats, like it reflected something about me, about us, about what we'd built together. I took early retirement at 55 when my firm was acquired. After that, I handled most of the house, cooking, the grocery runs, the repairs, keeping track of which neighbor's dog had gotten loose again. Renata traveled for work 2 or 3 times a month. I never questioned it. Why would I? I should tell you what I was like then, before all this. I was comfortable, that's the word. Not lazy, not checked out. Just settled. I trusted the shape of my life. I believed in it the way you believe in the floor beneath you. You don't think about it. It's just there. That's how she did it for so long. She counted on me being the floor. The day with the paper bag was a Tuesday in March. I'd driven into Columbus for a hardware appointment and figured I'd swing by Meridian and surprise her with lunch. We hadn't done that kind of thing in a while, and I'd been thinking lately, vaguely, the way retired men think, that maybe we'd gotten a little too settled, too comfortable. I wanted to do something small and spontaneous. The man I saw leaving with her was somewhere in his early 50s. Tall, gray at the temples, expensive coat. He held the door for her. She touched his arm and she thanked him. They walked toward the parking garage together, and I watched until they disappeared around the corner. I didn't confront her that day. I'm not entirely sure why. Part of me, the part that had believed in that floor for 31 years, wasn't ready to blow it up on a single observation. I told myself, maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's nothing. Maybe I was seeing something that wasn't there because I was already feeling vaguely uneasy about us and this was just my brain looking for evidence. But I drove home and I did something I'd never done before. I checked our joint calendar. Her schedule was meticulous. She kept everything on it. Client lunches, board calls, the quarterly offsites in Chicago and Atlanta. I scrolled back 3 months, then 6, then a year. There was a name that appeared so consistently, it almost looked structural. DH Strategy Review. Every week, sometimes twice. Occasional notations, Dinnerways DH Re Q4. A hotel in Pittsburgh that appeared 4 times in 11 months, always with the same initials in the notes column. I am not a man who panics. I spent 30 years managing job sites. If you panic, people get hurt. So I closed the calendar, made myself a sandwich I didn't eat, and sat on the porch until the light changed. Then I started paying attention. I want to be clear about something. I did not hire a private investigator. I've thought since then about whether I should have, and honestly, yes, it would have been cleaner and faster. But at the time, I think I needed to know myself. I needed to see it with my own eyes, not have someone hand me a folder. Maybe that was pride. Maybe it was just how I'm built. Either way, I did it myself. Over the next 4 weeks, I started quietly documenting. I'm a project manager by training. I know how to build a timeline. I noted when she left for work, when she came home, discrepancies between what she said and what the calendar showed. I drove by Meridian twice in the lunch hour window. On the second visit, I saw them again, same parking garage exit, same ease between them. One Saturday, when Renata was at a supposed conference in Dayton, I drove to Dayton. There was no conference. Her car wasn't at the hotel she'd named. I called our oldest son Caleb that night, not to tell him what was happening. I wasn't ready for that, but just to hear a familiar voice. He talked for 20 minutes about his new apartment and a girl he was seeing, and whether he should adopt a dog. I listened every word, and it felt like holding on to something real. The following week, I did something that still makes me shake my head a little when I think about it. I am a 58-year-old man from Ohio. I am not a spy, but I found the parking garage where this man D.H., whoever he was, consistently had his car. I arrived early enough to see him arrive. I noted his license plate. I have a neighbor named Jerry who spent 30 years in insurance investigation before he retired. I've had beers with Jerry since 2011. I knocked on his door that Thursday evening, and I told him I needed a favor. He looked at me for a long moment, nodded, and didn't ask any questions I didn't want to answer. By the following Monday, I had a name. Douglas Hale, 54 years old, senior portfolio manager at Meridian. Divorced in 2019. No children. Residence, a condominium in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus. I drove past the building once. Just once. I sat in my car across the street and looked at the entrance and thought about 31 years. About the porch we'd refinished together. About the morning she'd cried in my arms when her mother passed, and how I'd taken 2 weeks off work to make sure she didn't have to think about anything. Not dinner, not the phone calls, not any of it. I thought about that, and then I drove home, and I called an attorney. I cannot stress this enough. I know what the comments will say, because I've talked to men in my situation, and I've read the forums in the dark like everyone does. Some of you are already thinking, why didn't you confront her first? And my answer is, because confrontation without preparation is just emotion. And emotion alone doesn't protect you. Not legally, not financially, not when you've been the one at home for 3 years while your wife's income is the primary one. I found a family law attorney in Columbus named Patricia Okafor. I'm using her name with permission because she deserves the credit. First meeting was 50 minutes. I laid out everything I had. She told me 3 things that I wrote down and still have on a note card in my desk drawer. 1. Ohio is a no-fault divorce state, which means adultery doesn't automatically change the financial outcome. But documentation matters. 2. Because I had left the workforce primarily to support the household while my wife advanced in her career, I had a legitimate claim to spousal support. But I needed to establish the record of that contribution clearly. 3. Don't tell anyone. Not the kids, not friends, not her, until we had a strategy. I went home and I cooked dinner and I sat across from Renata and I was the floor again. Reliable. Unquestioned. She talked about a board meeting. I talked about the gutters needing attention. We watched something on television and she fell asleep on the couch and I turned off the lamp and I went to bed and I stared at the ceiling for 2 hours. I did that for 3 weeks. In that time, I documented everything I could about our shared finances. We had a joint checking account and a joint savings account, but she had individual accounts I wasn't on. I couldn't touch those, but I could photograph every statement that came through the house. I could log the mortgage payments, the utilities, the insurance, everything that proved I was the household's operational center. Patricia had warned me to move slowly and not withdraw anything from joint accounts in a way that could look retaliatory. I didn't touch a dollar. I just took notes. I made copies. I also wrote down, as clearly and honestly as I could, a record of our marriage over the past 3 years. Not to dramatize it. Just the facts. Who cooked, who handled which bills, which school events I'd attended alone when she was traveling, which trips she'd taken. The dates, the stated reasons. What the calendar said versus what I could now confirm. It was a strange exercise. On paper, it looked like a normal life. On paper, we looked fine. That was the worst part. The way it had been designed to look fine. The way I had, in some sense, been managed. I have a friend. We've known each other since our kids were in middle school together. Good man, the kind you call when a pipe bursts at midnight. And I still didn't tell him. Patricia had said to wait, so I waited. I made coffee in the mornings and I watched the news and I drove to the grocery store and I was the floor. But I had a plan now, and that made all the difference. On a Friday evening in the 4th week, I told Renata I wanted to talk. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and an expression that said she was expecting something benign. The gutters, probably. Or maybe a conversation about visiting Mason in Denver. I said her name first. Then I said Douglas Hale's name. She went very still. I've replayed that moment many times since. I wasn't cruel. I didn't raise my voice. I had been a project manager for 30 years, and I knew how to deliver difficult information without losing control of the room. I told her what I knew: the calendar, the Pittsburgh hotel, the Tuesday lunches, the license plate, the building in Short North. I didn't exaggerate anything. I didn't need to. She tried 3 things in order. First, denial. Brief, reflexive, abandoned almost immediately when she realized the scope of what I'd documented. Second, minimization. It's complicated. It's not what you think. We've been struggling for years. I let her talk. I didn't argue. I wasn't there to argue. Third, she cried. I handed her a tissue. I meant it sincerely. Whatever she had done, I wasn't going to be unkind. Then, I told her I had already spoken with an attorney, that papers were being prepared and that I wanted us to handle this with as little damage to our sons as possible. I said I wasn't interested in punishing her publicly. I said I wanted a fair resolution. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Maybe she was. Maybe the floor had just stood up. What came next was not clean, because these things never are. There were weeks of difficult conversations, some of them through attorneys, some of them at the kitchen table. She was not malicious in the negotiations. I'll give her that. I think she was genuinely ashamed, or as close to ashamed as someone can be when they've compartmentalized something for as long as she had. What I learned gradually over those weeks, it had been going on for 4 years. Douglas had known she was married. Their arrangement, as near as I could understand it, had been deliberately kept separate from every other part of her life. She had been, in every practical sense, living 2 lives simultaneously, one at home with me, one at Meridian with him. What I also learned, which surprised me more than I expected, she hadn't been happy for a long time. I don't say that to excuse anything, but I had genuinely not known, or perhaps, and this is the part I've had to sit with honestly, I hadn't wanted to see it. We were comfortable. I loved comfortable. I had built my entire late life around comfortable, and somewhere in there my wife had been quietly suffocating, and instead of saying anything she had built a door and walked through it without telling me. That doesn't make it right. Nothing makes it right. But it changed how I processed it. Not into forgiveness, not yet, and maybe not ever fully, but into something closer to understanding. We had both failed at something. She had failed at honesty. I had failed at honesty. I had failed at attention. The divorce was finalized 9 months later. The settlement was fair, which is to say it was hard for both of us, and neither of us felt like we won. I kept the house for 18 months to stabilize things for the boys, and then I sold it because I couldn't keep paying to heat rooms that held too much of the old life. I bought a smaller place outside of town, a craftsman bungalow with good bones and a workshop in the back that I've been slowly filling with projects. Douglas and Renata are together, I'm told. I don't track it. I don't need to. I want to tell you about the morning after I moved into the bungalow. I woke up early. I always wake up early. It's one of those things that doesn't change. And I went to the kitchen and made coffee and stood at the window that faces the backyard. There's a bird feeder out there that the previous owners left. A cardinal had found it already, just sitting there in the pale morning light, completely unbothered. I stood there for a long time with my coffee and I thought, this is mine. Not in a triumphant way. Not in a sad way. Just as a fact. The quiet was mine. The morning was mine. The plan for the day was mine, and no one else's. I had not realized until that moment how much of the last few years of my marriage I had spent being the floor for someone who had stopped standing on me a long time ago. There's a particular kind of grief that comes not from losing something good, but from discovering that what you thought was good was partly a performance, and that the performance had an audience of one, and that audience was you. I grieved that. I let myself grieve it fully, and then I started filling the workshop. My sons know everything now. Telling Caleb and Mason was the hardest conversation of this entire experience, harder than confronting their mother, harder than the attorney meetings, harder than signing the papers. Caleb took it badly at first, which I expected. He's always been closer to me, and his sense of loyalty made him furious in a way I had to ask him to temper. Mason was quieter, more internal, which also worried me. But they're good men, both of them. They've navigated it with more grace than I did at their age. Caleb came out to help me set up the workshop last fall. We spent 2 days building shelving, arguing about the best layout, eating sandwiches on the tailgate. At some point, he looked around at the space and said, "Dad, I think this is the nicest room you've ever had." I think he might be right. People ask me, and I understand why they ask, whether I regret how I handled it, whether I should have confronted her sooner, whether I should have hired the PI after all, whether I should have said something the very first day on that sidewalk with the paper bag. Here's what I know. I'm not built for explosion. I'm built for planning. And the plan, the slow, careful, document everything plan, meant that when the end came, I was protected. I walked out of 31 years with my house, a fair settlement, my relationship with my sons intact, and my dignity. Dignity sounds like a small thing when you're in the middle of it. It doesn't feel small at the end. If you're somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, sitting in a parked car watching a traffic light cycle twice, not sure yet what you've just seen, I'd say this: don't blow it up on emotion. Take a breath. Find a good attorney before you say a word. Document quietly and thoroughly. And know that whatever floor you've been for someone else, you can also be the floor for yourself. It holds you the same way. It holds you fine. I'm 58 years old. I have a cardinal in my backyard and a workshop full of unfinished furniture and 2 sons who call me every Sunday. I'm doing all right. And honestly, I didn't see that coming either. But here we are. I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a dramatic way, just the quiet, honest kind of thinking you do when the house is still and there's nothing left to distract you from the truth of your own life. Here's what I keep coming back to. Nothing comes from nothing. Renata didn't wake up one morning and decide to build a second life. I didn't wake up one morning and become invisible in my own marriage. These things accumulate. Small choices, repeated over years, compound into outcomes that feel sudden but aren't. The Tuesday she first stayed late that wasn't actually a meeting. The Saturday I didn't ask why she seemed distracted. The years I confused comfort with connection and called it a good marriage. We both made choices. The consequences were just slow enough that neither of us noticed them arriving until they were already there. What I understand now, and I wish I'd understood it 30 years ago, is that paying attention is not a passive thing. I always thought of myself as a steady man, reliable, present. But there's a difference between being physically present and being genuinely attentive. And I had confused them for a long time. I was in the room. I was not always in the marriage. That's on me, and I own it. Even as I refused to let it excuse what she did, the restraint I showed, the 4 weeks of documenting, the attorney called before any confrontation, the measured conversation at the kitchen table, that wasn't strategy for its own sake. It came from something I'd learned over 3 decades of managing complex jobs, that the moments when you most want to react are precisely the moments when reacting will cost you the most. Anger spent in the wrong direction doesn't resolve anything. It just makes the other person the subject of the story instead of you. I wanted to be the subject of my own story. I wanted to walk out of that marriage with my clarity intact. And I did. Not easily, not painlessly, but intact. Caleb and Mason are going to be fine. I know that now in a way I wasn't sure of in those first hard months. They watched their father fall apart quietly, rebuild quietly, and keep showing up. I don't know if that teaches them anything formal, but I think there's something in the watching, something they'll carry forward into their own lives, about what it looks like when a person refuses to let the worst thing that happened to them become the defining thing about them. The workshop is almost full now. I've got a bookcase half finished that Caleb wants for his apartment, and a side table I'm building just because I wanted to. There's no deadline on it. No one is waiting for it. It's just mine. That's the thing I didn't expect to find on the other side of all this. A life that is fully, simply, quietly mine. I'm not performing steadiness for anyone anymore. I'm not being the floor. I'm just a man in a workshop on a Tuesday morning, sanding something smooth, with nowhere else I need to be. That feels to me like the only kind of justice worth having.